Morning, everybody. Let's get started here. So I will position. All right. So in the vise, I'm putting my 3/8 flat. It's a nice jig. Has a shorter shank hook, but it fishes really nice. My goodness. Oh, it's gonna be one of those days. Should be able just to take the jig, put it in the vise, and it should be parallel. That's what we're looking for when we're tying. A little bit better. So ideally, and I haven't really talked about this before as I'm tying, but ideally you want a vise that's parallel to your tabletop. You want to be able to put the hook in the vise so it's parallel to the vise, which is parallel to your tabletop. And then you might see me scooch. And since I was moving around a lot and I just sat back down, I might scooch a couple times as I'm tying. And what I'm doing is lining myself up directly behind the vise and the jig, because as we wrap, whether we're paying attention to it or not, if I'm off center and I'm wrapping like this, my wraps are going on sideways. And if I'm way at this side and I'm wrapping, my wraps will tend to be cockeyed one way or the other. So ideally, as we wrap our thread, you want to be right in line with where your wraps are being laid. So ideally, as we're wrapping, you want that thread to go around and be perpendicular to the hook shank and to the vise. So it's something I don't really touch on all that much. I might mention thread technique or wrapping technique. That's just one of those things that you pay attention to, and you'll see there might be a day where you tie 2 or 3 jigs and the hairs just not seem to attach right. Just try scooching your chair around. The other thing too is where you sit on the vise. I'm at roughly, I don't know, maybe a 20-degree angle looking down at the vise. If I was at a kitchen table, my chair is real short, but my vise stem is real tall, that's an issue. Now I like vise that clamp onto the tabletop. I do have some pedestal vices at my other table, and I use them. I'll use a pedestal vise when I travel, but I like a vise that's attached to the table. And then I have a tall draftsman type chair. So this workbench is tall. This is an old workbench from IBM factory. Original IBM plant is across the river from where I'm at. And these benches you find at garage sales all the time. So we're at 36 inches off the floor. So my chair is an adjustable draftsman style chair, and that way I can position myself so I'm not too low, not too high. And like I said, I'm guessing this is about a 25-degree angle looking down on the vise and the jig head as we tie. So I've locked my size A rod wrapping thread. I'm just going to take this black tail. Seems dark in here this morning. I got a window that sits up here that the sun shines through, even though it's got a shade on it, which really brightens up this room. It's still fairly early. I tie a lot early mornings, late at night. Like all fishermen, I get up early. The rest of the family's sleeping. So we're going to measure the bucktail. We want the hair to extend past the bend of the hook, the length of the body, at least. And on this vise, it's right before the end of this silver. If I touch the very end, that's the maximum I'd want to go in terms of length. All right, let's get this tail off. So I start with a darker color first. Of course, in the vise, the way the jig sits, we're looking at the belly. Let's walk this back to the head. There you go. I'm going to lay that in place. 1, 2, 3 wraps towards it's early morning, folks. So typically I'll do 3 wraps towards the bend of the hook, 2 or 3 wraps towards the head. If you notice right there, I actually took 3 wraps and it went towards the head. That's totally fine. The idea is you always want to lock your thread on, just like when the hook shank is bare. So I made a couple wraps towards the head of the hook in error, and I don't have to unwrap it. That's not necessary. Those extra wraps weren't going to harm anything, but to correct that, if you take your wraps back towards the bend of the hook and you cross over, you're locking those threads in place just like when you're locking your thread onto the shank of your hook. So the hair was tied on securely. Gave those fibers a twist to what becomes the top side of the jig once you're fishing it. And then I'll go with the purple. So it's pretty early right now. I typically get up 2 or 3 hours before everybody else in the house. Even the dog won't get up with me. So I measure these to the size that I want. Keep this pinch tight throughout the whole process. There's certain things that I forget to repeat or feel that I repeat them too often, but that pinch, that left hand pinch, has to stay tight the whole process. I cut a loop of size A thread of a opposite color, place it underneath my last wrap, couple wraps back towards the center of the collar, and then a few wraps back to the head. With these flat heads, it's really easy to get a little too much hair on them. The way that this head tapers down towards the collar, there we go. So the way the hair tapers down towards this collar, if I had 2 big thick pinches of hair that I was tying on there, you end up getting a terrible lump in your collar. Just the nature of this type of head. Something like a ball head, where it sticks up past the collar on the top, bottom, on all axes, actually left and right. It's easier just to put a nice pretty collar. It can be thick, it can be thin. So flathead is a nice jig. if you want to try to make them pretty, you got to be a little more conscious of the size of pinch that you're taking. And as you can see, this jig, it has a nice amount of hair. It's a good proportion of hair to the size of the head, the size of the hook. And it represents a bait fish. So that profile, let's see if we can. So the profile, that's very fishy, very, very bait fishy. Put this on my rack. So we'll just go and tie another one. I got a whole bunch of these to tie. Black and purple is an awfully popular color here in central New York, particularly for walleye. There's some lakes that's really the only color most guys fish, but it's not a phenomena just to that lake. Fish in the Susquehanna even, and I fished a lot of different areas of the Susquehanna locally and actually down in PA. And this black and purple is another, it's just a color combination. I don't know why it works so well, what it really represents, but it just seems like a color that works. In a couple different combinations. Recently we were tying olive and purple jigs. I do a brown and purple. That also works well. One of my favorite jigs on Oneida Lake is a purple and chartreuse, but it's something to do with that purple. That just, and the depth maybe that you're fishing, or the water clarity, I'm not sure. But then I'll go to places like Whitney Point, and it seems like yellow and white is the combination that the fish really key in on. So, and I'm mostly talking about walleye in this instance. So, but again, all right. So we've locked on that darker color first. Gave it a twist. Take my purple and I'm going to restack. If there's any patterns or jig styles that you want to see, or any specific technique, go ahead and put that right down in the comment section. I'm up for tying anything. Was part of a group one time. We actually would tie a lot of old style bucktails, patterns from that you'd see a lot in the 60s. They used a lot of chenille. They used a lot of feathers. A lot of the pike style jigs from that time period looked an awful lot like crappie jigs, just bigger. And they had a lot of fly tying techniques, a lot of streamer tying techniques that were used with the bucktails. And it was, these are patterns that I'm guessing were changing from being primarily a saltwater lure to guys that were using them in the fresher waters, and the jigs themselves were reducing down in size for the different type of techniques that they were using. But some of them were really fun. So that's something I wouldn't mind doing. So here we go. We're going to finish up this collar, wrap back about halfway, and then back up to the head. Now if you're tying flatheads like this and you're finding that your collar just is too big and too thick compared to, you know, how that head tapers, if it's just looking too big, you can reduce the size of your thread. So if I used a 2-aught nylon thread, that would help with the shape of that collar. If you're struggling with, you know, just making the collar pretty, you could use a flat thread, fly tying thread. They all work well. I stick primarily to basic nylon thread, mostly because of cost, but also it's something that if it's not broken, we don't fix it. So you know, using this plain nylon, it's a good quality thread for the purpose that what we're using it for. It works perfectly. We're coating it with head cement, which also helps with its durability. There's a beautiful jig. It's a pretty jig. So there you have it, a very simple jig. If you like what we did here today, go ahead, comment down below, like and subscribe so you don't miss any new content. And until next time, guys, tight lines.